All right, well, here we are again on another episode of Voices of Mishago, and I'm here with Dick Klinkner and Nancy Fuller, and we're just going to get right into things. So, I guess first of all, for those that aren't maybe even familiar with where your home is located, we were just talking earlier about what a beautiful spot here you have, and it's kind of all tucked away here. So we're at the end of Furman, right?
We're at the end of Furman, and this is a lot that we got from Tom Dishberg.
Ah.
Many years ago.
Many years ago.
Many years ago.
Do we recall how many years ago, or approximately?
About 35 maybe?
It was 1984.
Yeah, about 30.
84, 85?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's quite a while ago.
Quite a while ago. And so you got this 30-some years ago. It's at the very end of Furman.
Right.
So for those that have ever, maybe taken a walk back to the cornfields or the bean fields as you're heading east towards 40th,
Yes, right.
you might have gone down Furman.
And also, we negotiated an L shape.
Oh, interesting.
There's an L shape around this house that belongs to us. It's 100 feet wide, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And that was part of a deal with the Dishbergs.
But,
Gotcha.
Okay, it's actually not part of
It's not part of Mishago.
Mishago.
Oh.
That on the other side of our car is
Mishago's ends about 5 feet from our house.
Okay.
And the rest of it we own,
Gotcha.
independently of the organization.
yeah.
I see.
So we're making it a grove,
Aha.
and we've put about 15 trees out there.
Very nice. Well, for those that haven't ever been back here, in fact, I alluded to the fact that we were talking just before this about one of the dinners that we had. You graciously invited us to a dinner that was out on your back deck here, and you have beautiful butterflies, monarch butterflies that are flying away, and that's not by accident. You kind of engineer the space for that. Is that right?
Okay. And the other unique thing is the pergola.
Yes.
In the back. The pergola, that came about quite by accident.
Well,
And this lady came and
that's the reason we have the deck that seats so many people is because I saw an advertisement by the Amish for this pergola, and it was a pergola in a box, and I said that'd be fun. So then we had to build a deck to go with the pergola.
I like that.
And when Jim Murray came to do the work, he said it was the best wood he'd ever seen. He said he would have had to have ordered it special.
You're talking for the pergola?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
Jim Murray put that up for it. He said that was the best lumber he'd ever seen.
Interesting. And that came from the Amish.
Amish.
That came
Very
from the
nice.
Amish, yeah.
Yes.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was something about $2,000.
It was very relatively inexpensive. I mean,
Uh-huh.
It all came in a big box.
They're called the big box. Yeah.
That's what it's called.
Called the big
Well, and you have a big deck as a result of that big
Yeah, as a
pergola.
result of
It's-
that, we have a big deck.
I remember there was plenty of room for the dinner and kind of a cocktail station and everything. It was a beautiful, wonderful evening there, and we just felt so grateful to be invited.
I remember you being there.
It was a lot of fun.
I hope we can do it again. And everyone contributed.
That's right. It's kind of like a potluck.
It's a potluck.
Oh, that's what it was, the
Yeah,
potluck.
it's a potluck dinner.
Yeah.
And
The,
I mean, everybody wanted to come, so
Yeah.
we really need to do it again.
I agree. Well,
Joan
Puffer.
her friend too, the guy that was crippled.
Yeah.
I remember bringing him up on a wheelchair.
Yeah.
oh yeah.
Remember that?
Yes. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, she's always been very special to me. And the reason for it was I needed her. And she needed me.
Okay.
At a particular time in life. And so we are very good friends.
She monitors the house during the year.
This is Marion Puffer's daughter, Joan. Yes.
Joan.
Wonderful young woman.
Yeah. So she takes care of the house and us while she's all year round, but she sends us our mail. This is our red legal residence.
Yep.
Invited us to dinner at her house.
Yeah, she's very talented. You know, when you say, you know, she takes care of things around here, I've known her to, on our neighbor Mary Kay's place,
Yeah.
they were surprised by this massive bee's nest.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard that?
I heard about that. Oh, God.
And I think Joan had a hand in taking care of
Joan
that.
took it down.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, just to say more about Joan, but she said her father was a builder,
Ron. Yeah.
who is no longer with us, and she has a brother, and she said her father taught everything the father taught the brother, he also taught her. So she's very capable of
Yeah, the father and I were very, very good friends, and I knew that he liked cherry pies. And one of my keys is I make pies.
Oh.
So we're sitting there at their house, at their party, and he said, "Where did you buy the cherry pie?" I said, "Didn't buy. Went across the street, farmers. Anytime after they're done, we can pick the cherries. I picked the cherries, I put it in, I made a pie. Okay, Dick, where'd you buy it?"
He couldn't hardly believe
No,
it,
he couldn't
huh?
believe that I made the pie. It's one of my hobbies.
Wow. Well, that's good to know when we may come knocking. And, you know, speaking of Ron and Joan and so forth, I knew Ron a bit as well. Wonderful man.
Person.
Someone that, you know, sometimes the term salt of the earth can get tossed around as a cliche. He is, I recall him as being a man of few words, but immense common sense talent.
He did.
Yep.
and contributing.
Yes. Very contributing, just a heart of, just a wonderful heart.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we,
And for those who don't know, he's an American Indian. He was.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Puffer is a long time Indian name in this area. So I mean, his family's been probably, centuries in this area.
Yeah, there's a school named after
Yeah,
him.
there's in Muskegon County. There's a school named the Reese Puffer School, and it's named after his family. Yeah. So
Wow.
all the Indians aren't up north. They're
Sure.
they grew up around here too. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. So let's go back. You know, we were talking about, you know, picking up the property from the Deschberg. So this is back in the mid 80s. How did you learn about Mishago in the first place?
We learned about it. Carol, my first wife, has a cousin that lives in Chicago, and she told us about this place. And we'll come up here and spent time with rented from Parati's. No one says it's recorded. No one will say next. They screwed.
So it was in, part of the Chicago clan. You know, this, again, I suspect everybody knows Mishago is a conjunction of Michigan and Chicago.
Right.
And I think in large part, especially in the early years, it was almost exclusively Chicago.
Right.
I think the Mishago was only because the Michigan part of the Mishago was only because the land was in Michigan.
That's right. Yeah.
So you had learned about it, you know, through Chicago.
Right.
Through relatives in Chicago.
Yeah. So we actually came up here as renters to begin with,
Okay.
and that's how we got in.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tom Deschberg was the one who was willing to sell us this lot.
Yes. So the Deschberg family is one of the original founding families. Yes.
And you see, Dick family and my family too. We grew up in Muskegon, so we're familiar with Lake Michigan, and we're familiar with Whitehall and so forth.
With Whitehall, yeah.
And Carol, his first wife, had always when they moved to Washington D.C. and she had always missed her friends in Muskegon. So you take
So she finally we'd made enough money to buy this place, and then to her the consolation was to build a home here.
Very nice.
This was her place.
Wow. Yeah. So, and just to touch on that a bit, I know that Carol was your first wife, and she passed away from cancer.
Cancer.
Okay. And but the two of you knew each other, like you say, as kids, more or less, right?
From 10 years
kids.
old. Yeah.
Wow.
And one of the other things that we learned one time when President Jim Reese and Frowowski's came to visit, her dad was living with her. Mm-hmm. And her dad comes out and he starts talking and about things. And I said, oh my God, he and my mother went to high school together. I said, just flashed through my mind. They literally went to high school together.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
So
I had moved to Washington D.C. in the 70s.
Yeah.
Early in 72, and he moved in the 60s.
Yeah, that's.
But we lived in D.C. He lived in Bethesda.
Right.
He was in the. My
Well,
husband was in the
there's a place
journalism
called-
world, and he was in the.
You're familiar with Johns Hopkins?
sure.
Johns Hopkins has a special division, and it's a group of scientists, and that's the division I was with Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
We developed the first computer war games. That was our first job.
I only half kidded recently when we went to dinner at the old Channel Inn, and I said, Dick, I want to hear some of these stories from your career. And I said, but if you're going to tell me something, then have to turn around and kill me afterwards, don't tell me, because I know you're working on some top secret stuff. I want to circle back to that.
Okay.
So you both ended up going to the east.
Yeah. So we both lived. We only lived about 5 miles apart.
All right.
When we both were there for years and years. So.
Yeah.
Right.
And we knew each other was there, and we like once every 10 years we'd see each other. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And I remember maybe it was during the dinner that we had out here on your beautiful large deck with a beautiful pergola. At some point, we were talking because Emily, my wife, is from Vietnam. And I remember, if I recall correctly, that you've done a fair amount of travel to Southeast Asia and so forth.
Yeah, I lived in Southeast Asia for a couple of years. My then husband, was a journalist for Time magazine, so he was in Vietnam a lot, or he was in Vietnam, and I lived in Bangkok most of the time, but I also spent some time in Vietnam.
Wow.
As well as other countries, it was because the Thais would only give us 90-day visas, so every 90 days we had to go out and go someplace. So as a result, I went to India, Kashmir, Laos, Cambodia, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong. I think that's it.
That's it? I was counting on my fingers and I ran out of fingers and thumbs.
I really I saw a lot of places.
That's wonderful. And, it kind of forced you to kind of move out and move along, with a 90-day visa window.
Yeah, 90 days. So actually, I was very lucky. I had two young kids. They were elementary school. So we just went and we went to visit people we knew, and it was great.
How amazing. And how enriching to the life experience to travel and experience so many different cultures.
Yeah, because growing up in Muskegon, you don't, especially in Muskegon, the only thing you knew about other cultures was that they were others.
Yeah, you knew they existed, but beyond that, you really didn't experience it. You had to get outside the confines of Muskegon.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, well, so now you're in DC, and bear in mind you can't say anything that either I or anybody listening to this can get a hit put on them by the CIA with what you're going to say. So
that's a long time ago.
I know it.
He started his own business after he left. Yeah.
And what was so it was war game simulations and so forth. Very intriguing. Tell me more.
You got to remember, it was during the Cold War.
Okay.
And I became an expert in how you search for Soviet submarines.
Interesting.
And my friend gave the Operations Control Center for the Atlantic Fleet all of the tools that they needed to do computer search for submarines. We did that for them.
Wow.
Okay.
Now, let me pause there and back up. How did you learn this? Was it your formal
I learned
education?
it because when I went to work for the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, they put you through a training program to become a rocket scientist.
Literally.
Literally. Okay. One of the secretaries came to me and said, Dick, a fellow by the name of Art Pennington's going to do something that's never been done before. Why don't you go and talk to him? So I went and talked to Art Pennington. Art was going to build the first computerized war games.
Wow.
Okay, that was a brand new, and I said I'd like in.
Wow.
So he had to, kind of draft me into the program.
And this would have been during what years, roughly?
Let's see. 80s?
60s.
60s. Oh, I'm sorry, the 60s.
60s,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yep.
She's right.
In the 60s. So you had already done your formal education.
Yes.
Help us understand so you went to probably grade school in Muskegon, and then where from there?
Grade school in Muskegon. And I was always, I don't know how to put this, they could never tell how smart I was. I'm serious.
I understand.
They never could.
Right.
So I did a lot of tutoring and such. But most of all, I liked working with people and developing people.
Wow.
And so I started a company of my own.
And where did you go to school from Muskegon?
From Muskegon, I went to Michigan State.
I knew that, but I just wanted you to say it. I wanted to get it on the record.
Okay,
go green, go white, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, maybe you want to, there were three of us who were considered the top students at Michigan State.
Wow.
Tom, myself, were ordinary. The other guy was the first student ever to graduate from Michigan State with straight A's.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That was the competition. Huh? But
Yeah.
tell him about, like, he worked 20 hours. He worked full time
Oh, okay. I also worked,
at A&P.
I worked half-time to going through school besides.
Wow. So
do you remember the old A&P stores?
I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
So I worked for the old A&P stores.
Stood for Atlantic and Pacific.
That's
Yep,
right.
the big grocery store chain.
Yeah, so I worked at 6 o'clock at night or at 6 o'clock in the morning.
In addition to going to school
Yes.
at MSU, and you were studying what at MSU? Was it something in the...
No, a math and physics major.
So you're a math and physics major, and you're working at the AMP. Okay.
Half-time.
So, half-time.
But he was a union man.
He was a union
But I
man.
was a union man, absolutely union man. I knew what the union rules were, and we came in the morning on Monday morning. We'd get 2 trucks come in, and we would unload one and then go to coffee and come back. Well, this one particular manager thought we ought to unload both trucks, and I said it's against the rules. You can't do that. And when I came back, he had pulled my time card.
Which meant he was fired.
I was fired. I don't know if you know who Jimmy Hoffa was. Jimmy
I've heard of the legend.
Okay, Jimmy Hoffa.
I think he's buried around here in Mishago, isn't he?
That's right. There's some concrete.
So anyway, the guy that I worked for called right away, and it was settled overnight that I would be back at work.
So you were preparing your way for war games. Still. Oh, that's great.
Already.
So you were studying math and physics at Michigan State University. Just had to get in that Michigan State University statement again.
Yeah,
and so then...
And then they ran an ad for the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. And I contacted them. That was my junior year. and they invited me out for an interview. And then when I left, I went to work for them.
Wow. So off you went, and so you started there, and you're kind of moving through that program, and then kind of picking up where we were just earlier,
Yeah.
where you heard that there was this new. You're on this path to become a rocket scientist. Like
That's right.
literally, they're training you to become a rocket scientist, and you heard of this new project.
Wargaming.
This wargaming. This was brand new,
Right, yep.
and you felt, hey, that sounds like that's up my alley. That's of interest to me.
Yep.
And you worked for a while and then started your own company, or what? Did you start your company right?
No. I had an advisor.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Lloyd Bell. Lloyd Bell was a naval officer. Absolutely one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life. And he's the one who guided me.
Wow.
He said, go to work for this company called Tetra Tech before you start your own company.
Tetra Tech.
His name was Tetra Tech.
Uh-huh.
And I went to work for Tetra Tech, and I learned on them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the head of the man was Nicholas Bortinsky, and he and I became very good friends.
And he was with Tetra Tech then.
He was the head. He owned Tetra Tech, yeah.
I see. So the power of having a good mentor.
Oh, a very good mentor,
you know?
yes, very much so.
So you had someone guide you and make that suggestion, and then you're at Tetra Tech,
Right.
and you learn while you're earning.
Right.
You know, you're having a job and,
Right.
and earning, but learning. And
Yes.
you were there for some number of years, and then ventured out on your own from
Yeah,
there.
4.5 years.
4.5.
Yeah, and then many years later, I happened to be out in Pasadena where he lives. And I called, and his secretary says, well, he usually doesn't see anybody anymore. He'll see you.
Nice. Wow. What a close relationship.
Oh, yes.
And I literally shaped the trajectory
It did.
of your life.
It did.
So you started this company, and there's a technology or methodology using computers to
Right.
basically work with the Department of the Navy, I guess, and
Yes.
and kind of figure out where submarines are at in this massive ocean.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, and a fellow, Dan Wagner, is a good friend of mine, and I said implemented all the software the Outcon Center needed to chase down Soviet submarines.
I just, there's so many questions I have about this, right? So, first of all, just to kind of frame things a bit, how long did you run the company? How long was this 10 years, 20 years?
Closer to 20 years.
Closer to 20 years.
Yeah.
So, all during this time, because this is a dynamic thing, right?
Oh, yes.
Where you figure something out, something changes, technology moves along. Their submarines, their technology changes,
All right.
and then
Right.
you've got to change with it. So it's
We went from 3 of us to 265
Employees.
employees.
wow, geez, that's a pretty good sized company.
Oh, yes.
3 to 200, over 260,
5, yeah.
265 employees.
Yeah.
My goodness. And you were just on a day-to-day basis, this was, you say, doing war games. So you're literally doing...
No, I was war games. My other part was intelligence. And the other one was how acoustics propagate in the ocean. So we had 3 different talents that we had.
So those 3, again, are war games.
Right.
The second one was
Intelligence.
just
And
writ
the
large.
first one was how sound travels in the ocean.
How sound travels in the ocean.
Right.
Okay, so all those 3
Yeah.
were under the domain of your company.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, there are things in which sound gets tracked.
Mm-hmm.
And it just goes on, it goes on for hundreds of miles. And the Bell Labs people figured out how to take advantage of that and detect Soviet submarines.
No kidding.
Yep.
So there's a certain characteristics within the physics of water or a liquid
Yes,
or the
absolutely.
ocean where a sound wave that gets initiated call it a ping, call it a whale call, call it whatever. Two rocks banging together
can go for hundreds of miles.
And if you are aware of this and can develop technology to pick up on that,
right,
and then you can then somehow, were you able to then track the origin of that sound? Is that kind of ultimately where?
Well, you will do it in real time.
Right.
Yes. You'll be keep track of them in real time.
Right. So by picking up on these, I mean, this was one of the basis of the technology is then, hey, we've picked up on this. It's 183 miles away, and that means that there is a high likelihood of in this case, a Soviet submarine that is off the shelf of
Southeast.
Yes.
Okay.
Wow. That's high stakes stuff.
They hired me to do the reports for them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, not at your company. You wrote the reports or whoever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was you were and I so
Jumping times.
there's I guess it begs the question, was there ever any really interesting events? I mean, this is Cold War era. Any interesting events being that in the 60s, the 70s, where maybe the office, the naval office was like, that's interesting. We didn't know there was a Soviet sub, parked off the shores of Myrtle Beach or something like that.
The incident in Cuba.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
You're talking during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Was really tense.
I bet.
Really, really tense.
Sure.
Now, through the wargaming, we had predicted, and the Soviet submarines just had what we call snorkel submarines at that time, that they would only be able to stay underwater for about 3 days.
Because there was no nuclear powered subs.
Well, they had no fresh air.
Right, because so they had to surface.
So we had predicted that in 3 days they would have to surface.
Right.
And that was quite dramatic. Mm-hmm. You can imagine the missile crisis going on.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this, in the war games portion of your company then, so you would run scenarios, basically, is what it would be.
Yes.
Is that you would work to predict if the United States did such and such an action, then the Soviets
did, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, believe me, it was tense.
I bet.
That was really tense, that one.
I imagine. Well, it was tense. I mean, I wasn't privy to it, directly, but certainly just in the course of history and in the history books, I think everybody can vividly imagine or visualize, the newsreels of the time and Kennedy and the whole Cuban Missile Crisis. It was a very, very dicey situation going on.
Very, very touchy.
And so you're at the epicenter of that because, in essence, that was a naval front. This wasn't a land, this wasn't an air. There was parts of it that was land, of course, on Cuba, but this was ships coming in, submarines, I'm sure Soviet submarines, and so this was a naval front.
Yes.
And here you are in wargaming and operating a company that does intelligence, wargaming, and acoustics.
Right.
Wow. Interesting. Very interesting. Nancy, I don't know what you see interesting in this guy. He's so boring, isn't he? Right?
No.
That's
that's. I fell over there.
Yeah.
That's it.
So let's segue to that, because I guess in a way it's almost a reunion for you guys.
Yes.
your wife passed away, life is moving along, and you guys just are by fate having to, just seemingly in the same neighborhoods from Muskegon to out east, and now
It was about a year later we got together, wasn't it, Dan? About a year later.
Wow. And so that would have been about what year?
That was
2010.
20. Okay, 20.
I remember
2010.
Yeah, 2010.
2010 we got together.
Excellent.
Yeah, and because Carol died in 09.
Yeah.
And I had retired at the end of 09. I was at the Smithsonian for about 30 some years, so I finally, I was single, so for 40 years, going to Washington, of course, living in Vietnam was just fine, but moving to Washington was tough on a marriage.
Oh, sure.
I got to tell you a little story here.
Don't make me have to edit this.
We're sitting at this table, and she's agreed to marry me. And her question back was, I want to keep my name.
That's a
And
fair deal.
I said, of course.
That's wonderful.
For two people out of the 50s, that was a new thing.
True. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I kind of brush it off, of my era, but no, that's a real kind of a unique thing of your era.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
So 30 some years at the Smithsonian.
Yeah. One of the good things that came out of living overseas is, and I was, as I say, I was alone a lot because my husband was in Saigon. So you have to, well, it's a time to grow up. And first of all, you have to learn to entertain yourself, not just sit there and wait. And there was no phone and there was no mail. So anyway, I met, there was a lot of interesting women there who were there with their husbands. And since, and you certainly, a spouse could not work. And so there, a group of women started, and some men also, started tours of the National Museum in Bangkok. And they were English language tours, but there were other there was people Spanish and Italian, German and French, that also were part of it. I'll back up. Thailand is English is their major secondary language.
Okay.
So there, and there's a lot of tourism. Besides, lots of foreign nationals live there. So they started this English language tour of the National Museum, and so that was one of the things I joined, and I began to become very interested, and we ran, and we had the notion of adult education also was one of the things. We had semester-long tours of subjects related to Thailand or whatever someone might suggest, and the person would suggest it and then organize local people or foreign nationals who knew something about it. So I organized a tour of a semester on Thai ceramics, which was, and I took tours to other different parts of Thailand. So anyway, so I did adult education, which I had never done before, which is fascinating and fabulous. And so I took those skills, knowledge back to me when I went back to DC. And so I went down to 5 minutes. Yeah. And so when I went to,
there's something I want to say to her.
when I went back to DC, I went to the Smithsonian to volunteer, and they said, thank you very much.
You got to tell them about your relationship with the Ak-Chin tribe.
Oh, well, that comes along. So I will. Okay. So actually, I did start doing some tours at one of the Smithsonian, and I learned that there were people being paid for what I was doing for free.
Oh.
and that George Washington University had a program for museum studies. So I signed up for that, and so that brought me. So I got a job at the Smithsonian. I got a job as a secretary because I had a master's degree, of course. And I learned how to answer the phone and push the button. I never got that in college. You push the button so that you tell someone, so-and-so is on the line for so-and-so. And then I would get phone calls like, what's on at the museums in Baltimore? I said, how do I know? So I learned how to look that sort of thing up. And this is, of course, before the internet.
Sure, because this would have been what years of
this was in the 70s.
Sure. Okay.
And in true government ways, when the money ran out for that program, that was the end of that program. But they had another secretarial job. And unaccustomed as I was, I couldn't type and I couldn't take notes.
Some secretary you are, right?
Some secretary I was. We had better names. We were assistants.
Okay.
So anyway, so I worked my way up the ladder. And an opening came for someone to, the office I was in was a museum services, Smithsonian services to museums in the United States and abroad. And what that meant was you used Smithsonian expertise based on the fact that everyone in the United States contributes to the Smithsonian because that is federally funded. It's the only museum that is federally funded.
I did not know that.
Yeah. But the only thing that's only federal funding for a limited number of staff and maintenance of the buildings.
Okay.
Everything else has to be raised by private money. So that's another thing I had to learn was how to raise private money. But anyway, the money ran out, so I got the job because there was no money. And it was working with American Indians who were starting their own museums on the theory that because people like to go to museums and see Indian stuff, maybe they'd like to come to an Indian reservation and see Indians and museum stuff.
Sure.
So it was actually viewed as an economic initiative for American Indians. And the federal government gave money to build the buildings. They didn't give any money for staff training or staff or collection care and all the other things you do. So that thing just floundered out there in the country. So anyway, I got responsible for raising money and running some staff programming. And from that, I had a number of opportunities, and one of which was to work with a group of American Indians in Arizona called the Akchin, and it was turned into a major project in which they started a museum that wasn't intended for tourism. I brought them this idea from Canada, and the museum isn't intended for tourism. The museum is intended as an educational tool for their own population. Interesting.
So they don't lose their legacy, their sense of history, and so forth.
Because life changed so much in the last 30 years.
Sure.
And this group that I worked with was very interesting. It was 500 people, and they were very industrious and very clever, and they had really good lawyers. And they got water. They got water from the federal government by treaty, and they had never gotten the water, so they didn't sue, but they got the water. So they changed from a subsistence farming to a major cotton producer.
Interesting. So what region of the United States?
This is south of Phoenix.
South of Phoenix.
South of Phoenix.
And they're called the
Akchin, A-K-C-H-I-N, Akchin Indian Community. And they've just not only thrived, but they give back. And they're right next to a town called Maricopa, and their kids go to school in Maricopa. They interact. They built fabulous sports arena for them.
If I can make one comment. I used to go with Nancy, and they had this gathering one time. And there was one of the fellows that I knew. And I went over and I talked to him. And I said, how did you know when you were doing something special? He said, when other tribes called me.
Oh, sure. Interesting. Now, why do you think it is? I think, of course, I'm speaking for myself, but I think I'm speaking for many others that have never heard of the Akchin tribe, where you hear of, say, the Chippewa or the Sioux or the Apache. What is it? Is it just a smaller, more discrete?
It's a subsection of the larger ones in southern Arizona, which are the what we call Pima and Papago. That's not their right names now, but and they're not like so many of the tribal groups have clothing that's attractive, especially attractive.
Sure.
They have some special
the blankets that
blankets,
they weave.
Yeah, that's right. Something special. These people don't.
Okay.
They're growing cauliflower. And in fact, they've been farmers all their life because there is a river. The Gila River runs through there.
Right.
So they're just people.
They're just. I love that.
And they just there's a number of small tribes. One like it's over in Wisconsin. It's over there by Green Bay. And like in Maine, there's one, and one in Missouri. They do holiday cards, and they just work and they save their money and they acquire more land. They buy some more land, and they put their money into education for their group. Going back to the Akchin, I know very few of them graduated from high school. And in fact, if you graduated from high school, you got a trip to Hawaii.
Wow.
And I'm talking about 1980 now. And I read their newsletter every month. And I now see that the children of the people I worked with are now graduating from law schools.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
And most of the men go into military, and they're very proud of their military service, rightfully so. But the museum, of course, has a whole banner wall of but they also have, of course, learned some skills. And one of the council members was was a welder, and so he learned how to fix the farm equipment.
Sure.
Very hardworking, clever people. And these people, when I met up with them, they were multimillionaires.
Wow.
And
wow.
And
they're just quietly wealthy, quietly.
Well, and just right. And reinvest. These people are also communal. Many of the tribes that you hear about, particularly at Thanksgiving, when we go to the Oglala Sioux, who are out there in Nebraska, and we send out the reporter who says, and I know about reporters, who says, "Oh my, all these people are poor, and they only get $200 a year. They live on $200 a year." Well, that's true. Yeah, that's true. But not all Indians are like that.
Right.
And so these people, they're communal, and the money stays in the big pot, and so they have money to work with. Instead of getting an allowance of $200 a year, you put all that 200s together.
Sure.
And you make something out of it.
Yeah, that's they, like you say, they're reinvesting into themselves and just building generational wealth.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Wow.
yes, yeah.
Very
So,
interesting.
Every family gets a house. I must say the birth rate is really going up. There in the 80s there was 500, and now there's 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Some, of course, rediscovered their roots.
I like it.
Some of us just rediscovered their roots. It became interesting.
Yeah.
But
What a fascinating.
it is. Yeah. So it was really,
Yeah.
and I was able. It was really an experience.
So this program through the Smithsonian was in part instrumental in helping them kind of reestablish and get a kind of a foothold into society and their future state.
Yeah. They. Remember, I said that the Smithsonian doesn't have any money to do that. My services were for free, and other Smithsonian people and I brought along all kinds of experts over 5 years. It took us 5 years to build the museum.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this museum is in Arizona?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And but the tribe. Then we did an education 4 years. I took them to museums all over the United States, Mexico, and Canada, and it's their job to ask the questions. What do you like about your museum? What do you wish was different? How do you do this? How do you do that? And so they came. So they came back with ideas of what they wanted. They named it themselves, and it's staffed, of course. And so the idea was to train staff, not to bring in staff from outside, which most other Indian museums ended up doing.
I see.
Was bringing non-Indians to do what they wanted to do, which was to preserve some collections. But
Do you guys ever travel there? I mean, have you been? I mean, you were there during those formative years, but have you?
We were there about 5 years ago, 4 years ago.
Wow.
And the people and the people that we all worked together. I brought an expert from Canada. I brought Smithsonian exhibit designer, Smithsonian photographer. So we've gone back and forth for years.
Wow. Now, do you have roots in Canada? You mentioned some things.
Actually, I'm French, I'm part French Canadian.
Okay.
Yeah.
There were a couple of times you referenced Canada, and I
Yeah.
thought, well, that's neat. But then I thought, well, maybe there's a connection there.
Yeah. No, but that's so I was I was in the right place at the right time. And people say, well, how do you get that job? And you can't train for it, but you just have to be there.
Yeah. And
I had a boss. I had a woman boss, and she was an early boss in this museum world, because that was mainly men and who hired all these women. But so she was a leadership, and I learned a lot from her. She also took me places. I went to Europe. I went to Australia with her. I went Mexico a couple times.
Wow.
Yeah, so I had exposure.
Both of you really benefited from mentorship.
Yeah,
I think.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very
You
much
know.
so.
Yeah.
It's you sometimes you see those little stories or quips on a postcard that says, if you ever see a turtle sitting on top of a fence post, you know he didn't get there by himself, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of in a way. But at the same time, both of you also, clearly worked hard. You took your gifts and your passions and put them to work. It wasn't that anything was handed to you, but when there was a mentorship or a mentor that was able to give you a little bit of a directional or help a little bit, you were keen to take it in hand.
When we contribute some of the Muskegon education that we
Well,
had through
you're
this.
hitting exactly what I was going to say.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry.
We're coming
not
full
at all.
full circle
We
to
grew
this.
up in a world in which we were not afraid to innovate.
I love that.
That's what we got out of Muskegon.
I love that.
We never had to worry about it.
Yep.
We were always innovators, not even thinking we were innovators, but we were.
And what you're saying is that was
Part of
within
Muskegon, growing up in
the
Muskegon.
culture of Muskegon.
The culture of Muskegon.
And Muskegon as a community, or Muskegon as a school system, or
School system.
as a school system. So you were encouraged to try and fail
Can
to
do,
innovate.
Yeah.
You had that can-do
Absolutely,
spirit.
Yes.
I love
Now,
that.
I could trace back to my education in Muskegon and say that's where it began.
Wow.
I mean, Mrs. Victor, you ever know who Mrs. Victor was?
I do not.
Okay. Wait till Nancy comes back.
Okay.
This-
We learned two things. We had two things from Mrs. Victor.
And who is Mrs. Vector? Give me perspective here, since I have no
She
idea.
was the geography teacher in the 4th grade.
Okay.
A geography
You're
teacher.
in the 4th grade.
We learned two things. A, we learned how to outline. Outline.
We learned how to outline
And B, it was geography. And
Tigris and Euphrates.
we had the Tigris and Euphrates River, which we know is
Okay.
Iran and Iraq. What's now Zimbabwe, but was
All right.
the money with all the man with all the money in England. Okay,
All right.
what's his name? I've forgotten.
Who is it?
It's the
A current person?
no,
Oh,
Dad.
but-
When you get a scholarship to go to Oxford, you get a
like a knight or.
Rhodes Scholar?
Rhodes Scholar.
Okay.
Okay, Rhodesia. Rhodesia. We studied Rhodesia. We studied. Must have studied Mexico, something in South America.
Yeah.
I mean, she introduced us to the world. We're in
Yeah.
4th grade.
Wow.
Okay, now let me tell you another story.
I just love the fact too that sorry to interrupt, but that both of you can remember that was a
That
pivotal
was.
point, that was an
Okay.
anchor in your
Right.
childhood
So-
education.
So
I mean,
now,
'cause
okay.
I'm very good
The
at
heck-
organizing.
Yeah.
Okay, the Hackley Library.
Oh yeah.
So I'm home many years ago, and I'm going up the stairs, and Mrs. Victor is coming down, and she said, "Hi, Richard, how are you?"
Oh my gosh.
Okay? Now that's the kind of relationship we had.
Wow.
She could remember who I was. Yes.
This is a heck of a human being.
Oh,
She
yes.
went on to teach in junior high and then junior college.
Right.
She must have been very young.
Well,
She
I
was
know-
probably 5 years old, and we were
Yeah.
we were
Back then, everybody seemed
Yes,
ancient, right? They could be like 32 and were like that old person that
Old
teaches.
person.
and if you look, my parents are buried in the cemetery right there off Layton. She's right there.
Oh,
So
what
I
an
go-
honor.
When I go, I gotta go and visit her.
Yeah, I love that.
There goes Miss-
Well, let's bring it full circle back to our, speaking of geography, back to Claybanks Township here as we're kind of wrapping up our Voices of Mishago. And so you've had decades here,
Yes.
but you split time between DC and Mishago.
That's right.
Yeah. And can you play fan favorite? Is there a favorite? Do you like being here in Mishago more, or do you like being in DC? I mean,
Well,
it sounds
they're
like,
different. They're different
Got
aspects.
different
Yeah.
lifestyle.
yeah,
Her family's there. My family's there.
yeah,
So they have the family. We don't have the family here.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. So you have more of the family environment, obviously.
But here we have such fabulous friends.
Well,
We've just had we had kind of a couple of health issues this past winter, and we need help walking. And I
And
mean,
Ricky Deisberg watches out for
oh,
me.
and
Oh, my.
Bob came last
And-
night and brought the groceries in. I mean, people are just so helpful to us.
And you've already mentioned about Joan.
Yeah, and Joan, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And Bob Parati too.
yeah.
But Bob's getting some issues
And
that he's got to
he's
deal
got a
with.
Yeah.
health issue, and
We'll have to bring some groceries to him.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think
that's
early
right.
September here he
Yeah.
has a hip being done.
yeah. So, and in DC the traffic has gotten outrageous, and the noise.
The noise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we do live. The house is on a street with. The interesting thing is on a street where at least more than half of the people on the block have lived there for 30 years or 40
Oh,
years.
wow.
I'm the oldest on there now, but it's so there's and nobody has any relative. We have parties together and Christmas and Memorial Day and things like that. So there's a real bonding there because nobody has any family in DC. Everybody came from someplace else.
Right. Yeah.
My youngest granddaughter has moved to Northwest DC
And she-
and invited us
Yes.
to lunch
Okay.
That's-
Okay.
with her boyfriend
Yeah, so-
Billy.
but she's a long-term. She grew up.
She grew up in the area.
Gaithersburg. So I mean, so we have that continuity of the block, but the population, of course, and the traffic and blah, blah. And we get here, so we come here, we laugh. We say, oh, "There's another car on Webster Avenue."
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, as one that when Emily and I head east, as we do in the spring, we do a particular trip, and the recommended route is to hit the Beltway going around DC, and
Yeah.
we avoid that.
Yes,
we
yes.
we shoot southeast and
Oh, yes.
and go through there. That's just the Beltway, outside of what you're
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about.
Oh, yeah.
But it is unbelievable there. So you're quite the tale of two cities. The different, totally different environments. You come here. And like you say, we marvel at the one car that we see coming by, and so I was going to ask: is there any short list of favorite activities here? I know that, for example, because we were sharing in our preamble earlier about the favorite ice cream location.
Oh, yeah.
And none other than the Country Dairy.
The country there.
Yeah, I imagine
Well,
most
there's
people.
also Turks.
Turk's restaurant.
Turks is something that I hear. Speaking of Bob and Judy talk about so much, and so we're going to have to get there.
Let's do it sometime.
We'll do that. That's about halfway between here and Grand Rapids or so. Is that
Yeah,
right?
It's about a 40-minute drive
Uh-huh.
from here. They're about right.
Yeah,
So that's a real favorite.
it's on exit 10
Okay.
And Nunica.
at Nunica.
In Nunica.
And
Okay.
in fact, it's the old US 31.
Oh,
Yes.
that goes through Nunica.
Yeah. And of
Interesting.
course, beyond that, it used to be the stagecoach
And you will-
stop.
Okay.
We're not that old. We don't remember that.
We will guarantee you, if you ever go there, it will be some of the best food you've ever eaten. In your life.
I'm excited. Yeah, Turks. We're not soliciting sponsors for the Voices of Mishago podcast, but as much as we're talking about Turks, we might be able to get them to sponsor the podcast.
All I can tell you, there's no experience that compares with eating.
Is it a what style? Is it family dining? Is it upscale? Is it?
So it's wholesome. It's pork is their favorite, but they do a wonderful thing with fish.
Oh yeah, the
We had
walleye is wonderful.
We had fish tacos, and we got 3. We get 3. I mean, I could only eat one. We brought them home. It's ample.
They're ample.
So it's a good value.
We got a
Ample.
We got a walleye one time between the two of us. It was that big.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's just the French fried onion rings.
Oh my God.
Oh my God! We had
And Bob likes the you call the liver thing.
Oh, liver pate. Bob and I.
Oh,
Oh,
sure.
yeah.
I like a liver pate as
Good.
well.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
And then we take home what we don't eat.
Yes, because we always get another meal out of it.
Another meal, yeah.
But we have to mention Max Meats too.
Oh, sure.
Max Meats.
That is a fun place too. I mean,
Oh,
talk
that is-
about good people.
Oh, good people, good food.
You ever do their ribs? Are you a rib eater?
I am a ribs eater. I've never done their
Thursday.
ribs, but
Thursday.
and these are prepared where you just go in and pick them up already
Yeah,
finished.
call ahead. Call
Yeah.
ahead.
Call ahead.
Yeah.
Call ahead.
Call the
Okay.
day before so they know how many to put on.
And they do that on Thursdays.
Thursdays.
Now they also do like a rotisserie chicken prepped as well. Or
they
used to.
can't.
They can't get the chickens anymore.
Can't
Oh,
get chickens
you know why they can't get chickens? Because I think Bob Perotti ate them out of
Yeah.
all chickens. Because he told me once about how they would routinely, pretty much weekly, do that. So one time I was in at Max Meats, and they're very friendly in there,
yeah.
and I was
Oh,
talking.
yeah.
Said where I was, they asked, where are you from? And I said, well, over here in Mishago. He says, oh, you must know Bob Perotti. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, yeah, he's basically my next door neighbor. And I said, yeah, speaking of him, I understand he really likes your rotisserie chickens. Now, that's all that Bob ever told me, that he would come in and get his rotisserie chickens. Well, this guy told on him. He said, yeah, his rotisserie chickens and a cherry strudel.
Cherry strudel. Cherry strudel.
Cherry strudels are, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I said, so Bob didn't tell me about the cherry strudel, but
Well, we've actually made friends with them because usually once a year we order a tenderloin.
Yeah.
And it is
And he'll say, well, today it is $34 a pound. He
Oh,
feels
yeah.
so guilty.
Uh-huh.
He feels so guilty,
yeah.
but that's what he has
but we
to
do
do.
it.
Yeah, it's a nice.
So they're very, very nice people, and they allow us to drive right up and park, and we can go. Yeah, we can go in the back door if we want, but it's usually easier to go in the front door.
Yeah. So Max Meats and Turks and the Country Dairy. Again, most people are familiar with Country Dairy, and
That's a meal.
that's a meal. Boy, you've got it all right there, don't you? You really do. Any other entertaining things in town?
Yeah, Bob likes to do the music thing.
Well,
Sort of.
there's a jazz group called
I can't.
anyway, it's a
jazz
drummer,
group.
Oh, something about orchestra. No, wait a minute. The Truth and Jazz.
Truth
and
Jazz.
Jazz.
Okay.
Truth and Jazz.
Has both a combo and an orchestra, and they do very good things. They have to move around a fair amount because they have trouble finding a
A
venue.
venue, yeah.
But
So where do they play here? Are they?
in Muskegon,
Muskegon.
they've
In
got a
Muskegon.
place on Lakeshore Drive
Okay.
that needs work. But anyway, we follow them anyway. That's our big step.
Very good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you that this has been fun. I know I can speak for everyone that is going to be listening to this.
Yeah.
I felt I kind of knew both of you pretty well, but I've learned so much. So and it's been just, you've got amazing, very interesting stories and lives, and both of you. So and what an asset to the Mishago community. So I want to thank you for your time here and making such a great contribution to the Voices of Mishago episode here. And so with that, we'll wrap it up on this episode. We'll catch everyone next time on Voices of Mishago. Thanks again, Dick and Nancy.
Thank you.
No,